This podcast is sponsored by Success Day, an HR IT consultancy firm.
Hi, my name is Rina Joosten. I'm the CEO of Pera, and you're listening to Meet the Mavericks, the HR Tech podcast.
Hi, I'm Jaakke, and this is Meet the Mavericks, an HR Tech podcast by Success Day. In this series, we interview CEOs and founders of new, innovative HR tech solutions. We get to know what drives them and what their products or services are all about. Hopefully, this podcast brings inspiration to the HR community, celebrates entrepreneurial mavericks, and closes the gap between HR and tech. Rina is the co-founder and CEO at Pera. This tech startup develops the Periscope to support companies to confidently invest in the right people. Taking the latest developments in social sciences and natural language processing, the Periscope predicts future performance in jobs. In 2019, Rina was named one of the 50 most inspiring, trailblazing women transforming tech in the Netherlands. She serves in the task force for AI, counsels think tanks, and serves as a mentor for startups. Rina, thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited. As always, everybody will say, oh, she says that all the time, but actually, I was preparing this morning. I was already getting totally into the mood because I know what's coming. And let me first start. We met a couple of years ago when you just came back from China, and we had a very inspiring conversation. Now, a couple of years fast forward, my goodness, woman, what are you doing? All these things that are on LinkedIn and all the achievements that you have been able to create, find it super inspiring. But we'll dive straight into it because you're getting uncomfortable. I can see that. But I'm going to go straight into content, and then you can relax because it's all about content. Rina was just mentioning that you're an introvert, so not wanting to put you on the spot. But we're talking, amongst others, today about your company, Pera. And it says HR future performance jobs predictions. That's mostly a combination of those words. Why should HR actually want to predict the future performance? Why should they even want to do that?
Yeah, good question. And thanks for putting me nicely
straight into the content.
Straight into the content. We usually prefer that. Why is performance important? I think when I started with a group of people, this company, one of the things I really wanted to do was to bring fairness in the system, right? We know that skills and capabilities are quite fairly distributed amongst people, but opportunities are not. But then you get to the question, what is actually fair? And to me, what's fair is that people that are better at the job, should get it. And we also know from research that there are certain people that actually disproportionately add more value to companies in terms of output than others. And that's important to know. So if you want to understand what are the drivers of success, and why is that important? Because you want to get more innovations going, you want to make more impact, you want to have more revenue. If you do know that some people disproportionately add more value, then as a recruiter, you want to understand very early on who these people are.
Yeah, because then you can hopefully clone them or find out what is their secret DNA and then attract the right people, I assume.
Yes, absolutely.
But how do you measure the performance? I mean, there are so many performance indicators, not? Which performance indicators do you look at?
Yeah, that was an interesting journey also for us because basically you start with the end in mind. So we started to look at existing performance data in companies. And usually what we see, particularly at enterprises, is that there are annual performance reviews with managers.
Yes.
Yeah. So we collected that data, plus I would say more objective performance data regarding chargeability, revenue contribution, client satisfaction, number of innovations that were adopted in a market. So things that were actually cascading down from strategies into OKRs or KPIs. The interesting bit we found, go ahead.
No, I'm just
you're
already lost.
Yes.
Because I'm like, okay, so some of these KPIs you should have as a company, because I'm not sure if every company actually measures the revenue contribution of all of their employees. But I can assume if you're in a Salesforce type of organization that you do.
Yeah, it depends on the role. So in every role, hopefully,
Yeah.
There are objective measures of success. In an engineering company, you look at, how many story points in a sprint or how many clean code you release within a certain sprint. So there's certain things that you measure in companies to track if your strategy is actually working or you're behind. Now, we looked at these manager ratings of their teams and did statistical analysis whether they actually correlated with a specific outcome. And the interesting outcome was that it doesn't.
Stating that we should cancel performance reviews, something very long on my wish list, or not?
Yeah, or do it in a different way.
And what does that mean?
So it means that what people are really bad at is to provide, one input on a score from 1 to 5. So how would I score you on teamwork from 1 to 5? What is much easier to do is actually if you make comparative ratings. So if you compare people within a certain social network in a company, and you do that with enough people, then at least statistically you get to very limited noise in your data set. And then you actually do see correlations between how people are being observed by people with whom they work with compared to others versus, for example, only a manager rating.
Do you get a lot of resistance from companies or employees when you want to actually measure performance? Because I assume that a lot of people immediately go to the outcome of it. Maybe some people are not performing. Are they then getting fired? Or if you are performing, do you get a promotion? As simple as that. I know that goes very fast from where we are to what people want, but I'm just wondering.
I think they do it anyway, because currently they are already promoting people and they are already restructuring teams. They are investing in specific development areas. They are hiring certain people. So they already use a certain method to take a certain decision.
Yeah, true.
The only problem is the method actually is very badly performing. So I think if you want to do the right thing and you want to make sure that your company actually is prepared for the next phase in terms of growth, in terms of innovation, digitization, you actually have to have the right information or intelligence to make a decision or to base your decision on.
Yeah, so it's more objective, you feel, to collect this data and to actually then do a performance assessment, because a lot of these other decisions might be made based on bias or...
Yeah, correct. So, but for us, it was actually not even used for performance decisions. It was actually purely used to train our algorithms to predict who's likely to get or to outperform others. So when we started Pera, we wanted to predict, again, who's the right person for the job. And like I said, fast forward, we actually collected a lot of information in the right way through our own methods to train these algorithms so that recruiters can actually use them to identify very early on in the recruitment process who's likely to outperform after they're being hired in the company.
Okay, so just pause there for a second so that everybody can follow us. So actually Pera was being developed. You used all this data intelligence more or less to produce an algorithm that could detect in a group of candidates which of the candidates would be the best fit for the role and the best fit for hire. Would that be fair to say or not?
Yeah, so who would be likely to get closest to people that outperform others in a specific role and that deliver actual outcome?
Yeah, that's what you want, right, as a recruiter?
That's what you want. Yeah. And usually you figure it out. Usually you only see it once you work with people.
Yeah.
And then it's too late. That's why coming back to why should HR actually look at it, or even recruiters look at it? Because the cost of a mishire is, I think, 100,000 euros minimally. But the interesting bit is if you hire people that actually do perform, and again, disproportionately add value, so maybe 2x more revenue, it actually helps your company grow and accelerate compared to your competitors much faster.
So it was intended to potentially be a really great recruitment assessment tool or some sort. But I assume that you can use it also for lots of different reasons. Or did you only specifically put it in place for this group?
Well, initially it was really meant for recruiters.
Yeah.
So to really help them not only to identify top talent faster, but actually help them to improve the outcomes of people that they hired. So to improve
select
the quality.
the right people, right?
Yeah, really selecting the right people. But of course, if you look at HR more broadly, where else do you have to take decisions? It's about who do you promote? How do you restructure? Where do I invest money to help you grow?
Mm-hmm.
And that usually that data exists very much in different, and in different systems. You have an applicant tracking system, and then you have an HR system, and the two actually don't communicate very well. So we have a layer on top of it, which is Pera, to actually, and in the middle is this self-learning algorithm, right, that actually brings the two parts together.
So kind of regrouping that if you take the different angles of collecting data, putting it to use, having intelligence kind of up the game all the time, but actually being able as a recruiter to select the best performers later on, the best people that can actually have a great performance that fits your desires as a company. That's one. Then you're in the recruitment space.
Yeah.
Well, what else could you utilize this data for or this tool for?
I think 3 other elements where HR has to take certain decisions about people. So one is about who to promote.
Yeah.
Who sits where best in terms of
good one in the org chart.
in the organization. For example, who has potential to become your future leadership. I think a third one often is, okay, we have a certain budget for development, for upskilling, for coaching. But how data-driven is actually that decision? Do you actually know where your gaps are in your organization to get to high performance? Mm-hmm. So I think that those are 3 elements or decisions that HR has to take, where I think data and intelligence and objectivity has to come in.
And if you look at your customers, do they start with one thing in mind and then add the other ones to it? Or how does that work?
How does it work?
Yeah.
Well, initially, and that's why it took so long, we had to first look inside and collect the right data.
Yeah.
And that took so long because you can imagine, hey, nice, Anne, I will come and predict performance in your organization. By the way, I need to collect this and this and this data from your employees. Then I will construct and develop a custom predictive model. Then we're going to implement it for recruitment. And then and you will see the results in 6 months' time. And by the way, you also have to pay for it. Yeah. Where can I sign?
And I'm going to sell it to a lot of other companies doing exactly the same. And then I'll get back to you later on.
No, but this was the beginning.
Okay.
Right? So I had to do this in this way, which was really hard because you have to collect data internally in organizations. Yeah. Now, fast forward, finally, right, we have now 5.5 million people in this data set, of which around 10% we followed across their performance over the past years. Now the data set is optimal to actually say to you, okay, I need to hire my next sales director or salesperson, as an example. Make use of the data that we've already collected. Set up your digital interview with us and interview candidates right now without doing the data collection internally.
Wow, that's also kind of disrupting totally this whole executive search or consultancy business, right? Where people are still in a traditional way being interviewed.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah. Well, it is already if you
have
so many people in it.
Yeah.
What type of companies mostly use this product?
I think if we boil it down to the common thread or commonality of companies, it often boils down to leadership. So across this research period that took around 7 to 8 years, collecting all the data, providing custom models, we found patterns in high performance. And one of the patterns that we found is in innovation. So what leaders actually outperform others when it comes to innovation. And the funny thing is, those leaders that score high on this benchmark are usually our client. So we asked them to answer the 3 open-ended questions, and we can actually pretty fast figure out if they... And and those are companies, if you have to boil it down to what are the characteristics of these companies, often it's in leadership. So
they have innovative leaders.
They have innovative leaders. They want to work, and these are HR leaders that usually want to understand that they have to work more objectively, that they want to work data-driven, where they have a willingness to sometimes even take decisions that are maybe against their intuition, and where they take also steps in terms of the data security, the data privacy steps, which one hand is enterprise level. So we have big corporates that are our client, and usually fast-growing, quickly growing companies that go international, where cultural fit and hitting your financial milestones is a very important factor. Those are typically our clients.
And how did you start introducing AI in those companies? Because it might be the leader that's very innovative, but I also know that a lot of companies, the CTO or the IT director, or maybe somebody from data security, if they have a separate department, they're sometimes really in resistance of this kind of new technology entering their IT landscape.
Yeah.
What are your findings there?
It really depends on companies. So if we look at corporate level, it's one of the things that we have to surpass, and rightly so, I would say. So I think when it comes down to, I had a meeting, I had a session last week, and there were a lot of TA directors at that session, and one of them mentioned a company that they were using. I forgot the name, and then they implemented it, and later on they were kind of drawn back by their DPO. He said, wait a minute, this company doesn't even have an ISO certification. Why did you actually implement it? So I think usually what we see is that, you have to have ISO certification. You have to make sure that you have every part of the security set up, which we invested heavily in because that's our business. And rightly so, because you have to make sure that data is secured, that you treat personal data very, very well, that you have these processes not only set up, but also incorporated in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit more, how does that process work? So what does it do? So you're a candidate and you're entering the candidate journey. So you have pushed the button, apply at a certain company. Where does Pera come in, or what does it do?
It comes in either at the beginning, particularly with more high volume vacancies, because you want to give everyone actually a chance to be interviewed and to, identify capabilities.
So would that be like an online video?
No video. We did also a lot of research on videos. Actually, we found that I think we captured around 500,000 videos of people, but we didn't find any correlation between micro expressions and actual job performance.
At the end?
No. So what it does is, to answer your question, is, you get a link and you get 3 open-ended questions.
As a candidate?
As a candidate. So it's 3 open-ended questions. Like, for example...
what are you passionate about?
What are you passionate about? Why are you passionate about it? Or what's most interesting about you that is not on your resume? Or, you need to increase sales by 50%. What will be your approach? Explain to me how you did that in the past. And you basically write the answers. And that's it. And you click push the button.
And do they use this as, and we will talk about it in a second, what you guys do with it, but is it more or less in the first minutes of the application, like in the pre-screen, like the first flow, or where does this normally come in? Or does it come in at the end when you've already gone through live interviews and you think, oh, these are the 3 good candidates, let's compare?
Yeah, no, so for high volume roles, it's a pre-screening. So then we usually advise to use it very early on in the process because, we do know that CVs, personality types of tests have very limited predictability in terms of job success. In roles where you have maybe less inflow of candidates, you use it usually prior to your personal interview. So you have really intelligence and data to understand who is the right candidate, and then there's still this idea of, okay, do I like you?
So when you see, because you just triggered me by that small comment in between, but there's still a lot of companies out there that utilize, I would call, old school assessment tooling.
Yeah.
We can disregard all of that, throw
Yes.
it in the bin.
Yeah, well, it's nice to know what personality you have. But I'm after something else. I want to predict the likelihood that you will perform well in a particular role. And that's also what you like to know.
But part of the performance is if you fit the culture, not?
Yeah.
So
Culture is something else. Yeah.
So it is important that you know what type of behavior somebody expresses in order for it to fit the culture.
Yeah.
So do you also measure that, like the performance in a way, not only the outcome, the hard result, but actually almost a part of a likability, or if somebody is enjoying the work, or if colleagues enjoy working with this person?
Not per se if somebody likes to work with a person, but what we do see is that culture is important, and it's something different than job performance.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, these are shared values that relate to certain behaviors that, you showcase. It's almost like a common language that you share together. So in culture, I started the podcast by explaining how we collected the data. So in this way, you can also look at what are commonalities in the patterns of high-performing cultures, right? What do these people actually have in common in terms of shared values and behaviors? Who are great examples of that or lack examples of that? So it's something that we measure separately from job fit.
And if you then look at, because I think you mentioned you have around 5 million people's data in there, in the algorithm. Is there a certain trend that you've picked up on? Because that I would find super interesting. What makes high-performing individuals?
Yeah, it is different per job category. So we found different. So the way it works is basically the algorithms are fed by 3 types of ingredients. One was, the observations on competencies from people that work together. The second thing is objective performance data. And the third ingredient is answers to 3 open-ended questions.
Yeah.
And the algorithms can actually kind of create an optimal model by comparing what kind of cues you have in your language use that are different from people that are seen as a top performer in teamwork. And teamwork, let's assume, correlates to revenue contribution. Yeah. So that's how this worked. Now, we built this for many different companies. So at some point, you can start to look for generic patterns. So for example, in commercial success, we always found that people that are very client-focused and result-driven outperformed others. And we can identify that now by just asking you 3 open-ended questions.
Yeah, because the first part, I would assume, well, you don't have to be brilliant before to know that, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. But you're saying you can take it from the 3 open questions. So are they utilizing certain wording or length of words, or what is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's also interesting because here's where the AI comes in. Because what happens in reality is that as humans, we would look at what someone writes, right? So we can also read what someone writes. And we connect that in our brain to a value. So for example, let's assume that I ask you, what is the most interesting thing about you that's not on your resume? And you would write, well, I love to go to Greece on holidays, and I always backpack. And I connect that to something like, I also like to backpack. You must be adventurous, and we need somebody adventurous because we need innovation.
Yeah.
The set of algorithms looks at more than 200. We call it features, so 200 information points in your language use that we can't really observe by the human eye. That's why it's called Pera. Pera is actually seeing the unobvious.
Yeah, okay.
So the algorithms can actually pick up on those cues, features we call them. And that has to do with things like, more obvious things like language use, length of your sentences, but many of them are actually very abstract features.
So in that particular example about Greece and backpacking, what would the algorithm make of that?
Well, that's very hard to say.
Yeah,
because it depends on the data that's behind it, right? So it actually, we collected over these past 10 years many labels, information about these competencies and how they related to specific outcomes.
Yeah.
and language. So simply put, we can compare how closely related your language use is based on more than 200 elements in your language to people that have proven to be high performers.
Okay, in general, doesn't really matter in which industry.
Sometimes it does matter, but that's the interesting thing about AI, right? The more granular data you can add over time, the more specific you become and the more accurate you become. So that's why I always tell companies, you have to start now, because companies that already started 5 years ago, you will never, ever get to the intelligence level that they have.
If they do not collect data.
If they didn't start to actually use this type of methodology to predict high performance, because a company that already has been doing this and feeds back data every year, the intelligence level of what leads to performance is massive.
Because what has been on my mind is the first time I learned about Pera was during the HR Tech Awards last year. And I noticed that there was quite a lot of fans in the room and a bit of resistance in the room of people that are trying to understand, get their heads around this tooling, because how does it sit with privacy, and is it fair enough, and are you not biased by using AI, and lots of other stuff. And now I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, okay, so if we have all of this data and you want to predict if somebody actually best fit for your company, and you're stating that if you haven't started yet, you're on the backlog almost, you have to get started with this. What is then the key thing for most companies that prevents them from utilizing this? What is in their belief system or in their environment?
All the things that you just mentioned, particularly like, is it fair? And it... how does it work with privacy? What data? What level of consent? And we can answer all these questions, but that takes a little bit of explanation.
Yeah, people need to want to listen to it.
Yeah, and you want to. I've been in this space for a really long time, and going this route of understanding what relates to performance. Actually looking at data in many different companies and figuring out that data is actually not the right one. And then hashing out the best way to do it, and then showing in data that the method that they're currently using is actually far more biased and far less accurate than this. Takes a bit of time and explanation. And the lucky thing now is that we have data of 10 years. We have examples of clients that actually do 2x better in terms of revenue, as an example, have reduced their retention or increased retention of 25%.
But could it also be that recruiters at the end of the day are also a bit worried about if their job becomes
obsolete?
Yeah, because you're trying to sell, I assume, to the talent acquisition part of an organization, saying, listen, if you utilize this tool, you'll get better performance in your company. Yeah. I'm sure that CEOs and operational leaders will be super excited because it's very unclear yet who actually makes the real good decision in the recruitment process. I'm totally with you. I also do not believe that recruiters have a non-biased, very objective way of selecting. But on the other hand, utilizing your tool into their daily routine, why do you then still need a recruiter, you think? Do you still need them?
I do think so.
What do they then do?
I think people still want to interact with people. So there is this part where I want to talk to you, right? I want to know whether I like you, whether I like to be here, what the atmosphere is.
Yeah.
I like to get a really good onboarding. For example, if you hire me. So I think what I've seen in companies leading in this space is actually that they revert their attention to things where they can really add value.
Yeah, the personal touch.
Yeah, the personal touch. And helping them with intelligence to make a better decision, to speed up the process, right? There's many, the talent pool is going to be more limited.
Yeah.
We know that there's a European problem in terms of productivity, right? So the productivity in the Netherlands has only gone down, and that's a European problem. So if we want to help companies as recruiters to outperform, we need to adopt methodologies that can help us. And AI is a very good methodology to do so, but it does different things than what humans can do.
Yeah.
So the combination is very strong. And it gives you time to actually do things that machines can't do.
Yeah, so coming a little bit also to the close of the podcast, unfortunately, but one of the learnings that I take from this conversation so far is also to combine the two, to have both AI and human touch. And when you put AI at the forefront in the recruitment process, you can actually filter already quite a bit based on objective data.
Yeah.
Right? But it also means that you need to have innovative leaders. I've learned that as well. And that you actually have to listen to the answers to some of the concerns that you want to raise immediately when you hear the proposition.
Yeah.
So just before the end that we're getting to shortly, I have a couple of quick but important questions. So first of all, I'm wondering the 3 open questions that you describe as one of the things that Pera puts in place in companies that actually want to measure the performance and actually want to predict the performance. How do candidates experience that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think what we've seen as the biggest issue for candidates is often that it's really not personalized. So if they do an assessment or, it's usually a generic assessment that everyone has to do, you will answer the 3 open-ended questions completely different than me. So it gives the feeling to candidates that they can actually share their experience, their ideas, their vision. And well, we're about data, so we actually measure, right, how they experience it.
Yeah.
So there's no time limit to it, so there's no stress. So we have really good feedback loops from candidates. That's one. The other biggest frustration from candidates is that they don't really get data-driven feedback from recruiters, which we actually provide to them. So it's an option for a recruiter to actually send them a report.
Yeah, about how they scored.
And where they can actually further develop if they're interested in a position like this.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing because that's often, I believe, something that companies struggle with, but candidates absolutely hate it, that they put and invested time in it and they don't even get a reply, only a decline. So that's amazing.
Correct. Yeah.
2 more.
Okay.
We've all run out of time, so I'm going to be rushing you a little bit. But the other question I also have, we're talking about collecting data from companies in order to feed the algorithm and to make the predictability even better and better and better. What about those companies out there that might not have data at this moment in time? Can they just utilize whatever you've gotten already, or do you actually have to provide Pera with whatever you've gotten in your company, even if that's almost 0 to nothing?
No, that's not necessary anymore. Luckily, we've been around for a while. We have collected tons of data, found patterns in high performance. So if you tomorrow want to understand which candidate is likely to perform in a specific job, you can make use of our platform to do so.
Yeah.
But the interesting bit is, over time, if you want to understand what drives success, particularly in your situation, you can feed back later on data to the system. So it becomes your own living engine.
Okay, great. So that helps a lot because I do think that there's a lot of companies thinking, well, my data security or my GDPR department or my whatever IT department will find that super difficult if I would have to provide data.
Yeah.
But actually, if they could utilize the data that's already there, that makes it much easier to implement. So I think that really helps. And the final question that I actually have is I asked this to each of the HR Tech hosts, or actually not hosts, I'm the host, but the HR Tech guests, about what is their favorite HR Tech service or solution besides the one that they have themselves or created themselves, but something that they maybe utilize or are a big fan of or that I should check out or the listeners should check out.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's not only HR Tech, it's actually... I'm a big Microsoft adept. So I'm very, I think I reduced 40% of my work by using Copilot.
Okay, I don't use that, to be honest. Tell me, how do I reduce 40% of my work? Send it to me.
That's a module within Microsoft. So basically, if we have an interview through Teams, it can actually record, it can transcribe, it can write down actions. It can look at commonalities in certain conversations. I was recently onboarded in a supervisory board where I had to, read 150 documents as my onboarding. I actually asked Copilot to read all the documents and summarize it in one A4.
And it did?
It did. Yes.
Wow. Was it any good?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
So it only helped me to further deep dive on certain things. But that's it. It can every Friday I ask it, what are emails that I haven't responded to that I should? What would be your response if you look at the email?
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yes.
I'm probably the only person in the world that hasn't heard of it, but I'm going to definitely check it out.
Have a look.
I have a look. Sounds like it's, I kind of utilize ChatGPT, but this is next level on steroid kind of environment, I assume. Quick last question then. On that, on AI, where do you see AI developing? So not necessarily for Pera, but just, if I had to ask you in your glass ball, where do you think
it is going?
Yeah, where is it going?
Yeah, I think often we talk about AI. For me, it really starts with what are we trying to solve? So I think there's things that we all want: good education, access to good healthcare, a nice job where we can strive. And AI can help to get there, because I think the problem is that we have limited labor, and that will only reduce scarcity of talent. We have the problem of lower productivity levels, and AI can actually, for example, in healthcare, detect breast cancer already far better with less errors than a radiologist does. So what does the radiology can do is actually
utilizing this tool.
Utilize it, but actually do what a doctor can do best, and that's interacting with a patient. Because I want actually to interact with a person about my results.
And that's interesting, right? Because the biggest fear of a lot of people is that with AI entering more or less everything that we do, people fear that robots and
will take over.
Well, actually, it allows maybe a better personal touch or a better personal engagement.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen also in recruitment.
Yeah.
Companies that use it actually can spend far more time on things where they add value in the human interaction, in onboarding, in the experience, in giving me a feeling that I'm wanted. So I think that's where it's going, and if you don't do it, that's where you're left behind.
Yeah. So companies that even have currently a ban on using AI tooling in their company by employees on their devices, what do you think of that?
Well, I think there needs to be a level of data security.
Yeah.
So I think that needs to be in place. But I think not using it completely would be
missed opportunity.
Well, I think then the point is competitors will do it, and what they will be able to do is have business concepts that are better and cheaper than you can produce.
Yeah.
So at one point you're out of market. It's simple as that.
You're dead.
You're dead.
You're dead. That's the conclusion of this
whole podcast.
Conclusion of this podcast is: if you do not use AI tooling, you're dead. Okay, got it. Thanks so much, Rina.
You're welcome
for being here today. And really love the inspiration and the insights into the topic. I think super helpful, and you're an amazing woman with everything that you're combining in life: kids, business, being a thought leader as well. So I wish you all the best, and I cheer you on. I'll follow you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Meet the Mavericks, an HR Tech podcast. For more information about this episode, check out the show notes. And don't forget to listen to our next episode.